music is an essential part of the human condition. There's a quote that I often use from an American choral conductor, Howard Swan, and the quote goes like this: "The very essence of our art, what we are about, why music and people are so important, is namely for the creation and recreation of that which is beautiful, beauty in form, beauty in sound, and hopefully beauty in the wonderful transformation of the human spirit." There's not another class in the curriculum that I think does a significant job of transforming the human spirit.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insights from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies towards the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Dr. Christopher Kiver from State College, Pennsylvania. Let's begin. Hello everybody, and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would like to thank you for all of your support in following our episodes and everything throughout the podcast. And even just the other day, I got a text message from my band director friend Nicole, who was like, "Doug, I loved all the most recent episodes especially, and there was so much great content in them. I wish I could pull over and take notes as I was listening to them on my commute to work." And I was thinking, what's a good way you could go back and listen to any of our episodes on a quick push on a smartphone? And here's an easy solution I came up with. Grab your smartphone right now if you have one. Yes, right now. And head on over to applications like Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play Music, or even iTunes and subscribe to the show. Or you can even head on over to social media accounts on Facebook under Director's Circle, or even follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube to stay updated on all future episodes and events. So with today's episode, I'm very excited to bring this one as we are featuring a highly acclaimed conductor in the choral idiom. His name is Dr. Christopher Kiver, and Dr. Kiver is the Director of Choral Activities at Penn State University. We are. And with this episode, we talked in a wide array of topics ranging from what constitutes quality repertoire to even talking about the important role gender plays in the field of choral music and music education in general. So without further ado, here is my interview with none other than Dr. Christopher Kiver. Hello, Dr. Kiver. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My great pleasure.
Yeah, it's definitely a pleasure to have you here. So, to tell us a little bit about yourself, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. So my undergraduate degree is a Bachelor in Music from Trinity College of Music in London. I was actually a trumpet major at that point. And just before I went to music college, so in the summer before my freshman year, I actually had my first experience conducting choir. I came from, well, as you can tell from my accent, I grew up in England. And there was a really very fine youth orchestra system that grew after the Second World War. And there was an ensemble in my hometown that some years before was formed so that folks who had played together in youth orchestras or school orchestras and then got on to college all around the country, when they came home for vacations, they still wanted to be able to make music together. And so they had both an orchestra and a choir, and each ensemble would perform one half of music each. And so during one orchestra rehearsal, someone stood up and said, "Oh, the choir is looking for a new conductor." And so being the brash, confident young trumpet player, I thought, well, I've seen lots of conductors. It doesn't look that hard. And, conducting choir, that should be pretty straightforward, knowing nothing about singing or choir. And so I remember having one lesson with a gentleman who became my mentor, Geoffrey Hughes. He was the chorus master of the Bournemouth Symphony Chorus on the south coast of England. And I had to conduct one of the spirituals from A Child of Our Time by Sir Michael Tippett. And I didn't know what any of those three things were. But I had a lesson, I showed up to the audition, and I was against a bass singer who had been in the choir and was really a very fine singer. And so the smart money would have been on him. And we had to, for some reason, sit in on each other's auditions. And I remember the moment that probably led to me being sat here speaking to you, was that he turned to the altos at one point and he said, "Altos, if only you could sound as well as you looked." And so at that point I thought, yes, I've got the job. And so sure enough, I did get that position. And so I ended up conducting a Royal Garland by William Matthias. That was just a choral work. And then Purcell Cummings' Sons of Art with solo, choir, orchestra. I had no idea what I was doing. I look back now and wonder, what was I thinking? But so I had that experience before starting my undergrad as a trumpet major. And then soon into my undergrad, I had the dreaded embouchure change, and I found that my love of all things brass was sort of diminishing, but my love of choral music was increasing. So I was able to have quite a number of good opportunities conducting vocalists. So after my undergrad, I went to Florida State University for my master's degree in choral conducting. You couldn't train to be a choral conductor in England at that time. And my wife, who was from New Zealand and whose father was a significant choral conductor in New Zealand, his name was Guy Jansen, she told me about things like national choral organizations and the opportunity to study for graduate degrees in choral conducting in the United States. So in January 1993, we were down in New Zealand to get married. And 2 weeks before, my father-in-law hosted an international summer school of conducting. And the main clinician was Rodney Eichenberger, who had a very illustrious career teaching at University of Southern California. At that time, he was at Florida State University, and I was just blown away by his approach to conducting. It was one of those things where he stepped up to the podium in his very first session and conducted the New Zealand national anthem, just with all of the delegates assembled. And he would just do things like, on a long note, he would change his hands from palms down to palms up, and the sound would change. And so I thought, being British and cynical, I'm not going to change my sound. This is all witchcraft or whatever. But it soon struck me that I just could not help change based on what the conductor was showing me. So I thought I have to go and study with him. So I ended up doing that in the mid-90s. Then I went to Australia, to Brisbane, where for 6 years I taught grades 4 to 12 in a private boys' school in the city of Brisbane. And while there, I did some sort of adjunct teaching and conducting at a couple of the universities. I had a symphony chorus and several other smaller adult choirs. And while there, the University of Michigan Men's Glee Club came through Brisbane with Jerry Blackstone. And so I organized a tenor bass festival called Men of Song. And the idea was that the young Australian students would get to sing 3 or 4 pieces with the University of Michigan Men's Glee Club. And it was, again, one of those life-changing situations. I'd never heard of Jerry or the University of Michigan or Glee clubs, really. And I remember the Michigan Glee Club just sang a unison scale ascending, and it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever heard. And so then I thought, well, I knew I wanted to do a doctorate, and I thought that obviously Jerry Blackstone was doing some quite wonderful work. So I was fortunate enough to end up doing my DMA in choral conducting with Jerry at the University of Michigan. And then my first job out of my doctoral study was at Penn State University in State College, and I'm still there. I'm now in my 15th academic year.
Yeah, and that's certainly a lot. So to dig into that a little deeper, you had mentioned with your undergrad originally starting with an instrumental emphasis. That is a unique backstory to a previous guest, very similar to that story too. Dr. Derek Fox had a similar background where he had an instrumental upbringing, but then ventured into his career really focusing on choral conducting. So having that extensive background, especially even some study at the collegiate level, is there anything that you have taken from your experience as an instrumentalist that you have applied towards your career as a choral conductor?
I think in this day and age, it's interesting watching young students who I think tend to exist somewhat in silos. So, for example, a vocalist may listen to singers and choirs, but not really be aware of music in the instrumental realm, and vice versa. So I feel very blessed that really from an early age, I was exposed to a plethora of musical styles. I played in jazz bands, wind ensembles, orchestras, string quartets. And so I think that helped me to be aware of just the vast array of music that's out there. And I think as I have moved through into the realm of teaching and conducting, I'd really try to bring a comprehensive approach to all my teaching and really impress on the students that we shouldn't just be sort of keep our blinkers on and staying in our own lane, so to speak. I think too, and this is sometimes used in a derogatory way, but my experience shows me that quite often the better musicians in the choir do have instrumental background, so better sense of rhythm for sure. Quite often better sight readers, and so I think that that's helped me. And I think as a conductor, I'm quite well placed to be able to speak to an orchestra because I understand what it's like to have sat in the orchestra. So I think those things have been very, very helpful.
For sure. And to even now touch on that too a little bit, as you said, you grew up in England and that you even have teaching experience there when you started your career. Now working for several years or several decades now in the United States. So for a lot of our listeners, obviously having an American-based audience, could you describe any of the differences maybe in approaches to music education, if there may be any, in the European system versus the American system, and anything you've taken away from having worked in both that we can maybe reflect on to improve our craft and how we do things?
That's a terrific question, and that's something I've thought really long and hard about over the years. So in England, Australia, and New Zealand, and I should say, Doug, that what I'm speaking about here is knowledge that may not be completely up to date, but certainly up until the mid 1990s and even beyond. In those countries, curriculum music was really what in America you would call general music. So you would have a classroom full of keyboards, and you would have units that might be based on music history, followed by a unit on composition. And all of the ensembles were extracurricular. And so before school, lunchtime, after school. And what was fascinating there, while I was there, I became more, in Australia, I became more aware of the system in the United States where a vast majority of the music education occurs in an ensemble. And at that point I was thinking, gosh, that's really the way to do it, to learn through doing. Since I've been in the United States, the more I think about that, I seem to be leaning a little bit more back towards the model in the UK and elsewhere. Because when you think about it, in our ensembles, we are very much catering towards the concert. And unless you are in a unique utopian situation, you don't have one of those ensembles where you think, I have too many rehearsals, I have too much time. And so we keep working towards the performance. But in most cases, it's probably fair to say that we only are teaching what is in the pad. So, for example, if we're in a wind ensemble rehearsal, do we ever stop and listen to just a few minutes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and talk about that for a little while? If we're in a choir rehearsal, do we ever just stop for a few minutes and talk about Percy Grainger, Lincolnshire Posy? And the answer is not too often. And so one thing we might talk about a little bit later on is that notion of how do you balance the just practicality of putting on a concert versus what do we really want to teach in music education. Another thing I'd just like to mention quickly, Doug, is the graded examination systems that are in, again, those countries and other international countries. Some of your listeners may have heard of the ABRSM, Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, Trinity College London, Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And they have this system where there's a progressive, systematic approach to examining students from maybe as young as elementary age. They'll play 3 pieces. There'll be some scales. They will have to do some ear tests, some sight reading. And as you go through from grade 1, grade 8 is the top exam, probably equivalent to sort of first year of university, probably. But in order to do grades 6, 7, 8, you have to have passed grade 5 in music theory. So there you have to be able to identify, translate Italian terminology, you have to be able to write out scales, triads, all that kind of thing. So again, what strikes me is that if you become a fairly advanced, proficient player, let's say for trumpets, you're probably playing the first and second movement of the Hummel Trumpet Concerto for grade 8, but you have to have a pretty sound theoretical knowledge as well. And I'm not sure that the ensemble-based education allows that to happen.
Certainly, and there's lots of good points too in how you mentioned maybe along some of the points that in education in general in American culture that there's been wide debates, and especially over the past few years, of much like teaching to the test, much as in just preparing the music to the concert being solely our only product is in the performance. So with that said, I can definitely relate to, even in my own, as I'm a band director, a lot of times what I'll do is a lot of people recommend to play great recordings of the instruments to match characteristic tone, but even in a lot of success that I've had with students is playing choral music and really kind of bridging that gap. Even like if there was a time, I remember we were playing a piece called Air for Band. It's very lyrical and flowing, and even just playing a great recording of like a timeless choral piece like Salvation is Created or something, as far as an authentic recording, really helps bridge those gaps and kind of brings the broader spectrum of music to the students as a whole. So that's really neat to hear you say that. So with that said then, to delve into a specific topic that I know is very special to you is the role of musical advocacy. And with advocacy, especially now more than ever, there's many different ideas on this topic and many different ways to approach it. So to ask you first, how do you feel advocacy plays a role in a music program?
I think really, if we stop and think about, so what is it we're trying to do with this music education thing? We're not, I don't think, trying to get everybody into Juilliard as the next concert pianist, oboist, whatever. And that's also true at the university level. All of the ensembles are open to majors and non-majors. So a good number of those folks are not necessarily even wanting to pursue a career in music. But I think we're trying to help the students maybe become consumers of music post-college. Everything from maybe we pique their interest, they're going to go and attend a concert. Maybe if they're looking to purchase, they've only got 99 cents, they can only buy one track from iTunes. Are they going to choose Beyonce or Rihanna? I'm not sure if those are really current models, but I know those names. And so if they were to invest their dollar, can they do it with a piece that they find more compelling? There's something musically that speaks to them more than the other piece. But here's the rub. Can they actually articulate that? This one has a more beautiful melody. I love the syncopated rhythm in this other one. I love the bass line in this particular piece, and so on and so forth. And so I think in order to achieve that, it's critical that we teach contextually. So again, this is the same notion of just going over and above, getting the right notes and the right rhythms. But I try in rehearsals, I ask a lot of questions rather than sort of providing answers. And a lot of the time we're trying to, in the music making process, think like the composer. So, questions could be anything from, okay, so, on measure 2, beat 1, what is that chord that we're all singing? Hopefully they realize it's a major or a minor chord, whatever. And okay, so where's the climax of the piece? Okay, why do you think that is the climax of the piece? How do you know? And a lot of the time, what I love about that sort of open-ended questioning is that we're not trying to find maybe a right answer. You will know this, Doug, and many of the listeners will too, that we live in an age where students have been conditioned through all the testing to have concrete answers. So that's one of the critical things about what we do, is that this is a safe place for you to surmise as to why an event is happening, to understand or to think about what might the composer have been trying to convey with these blobs and lines and things on the page. And then what is our job to do as to performers? What do we as performers want to feel about the music? And then what do we want the audience to feel about the music? So to that end, when it comes to the performance, I think it's important that we teach the audience as much as the students in regular class time. So, for example, quite if I do a festival, I will, particularly if we're doing older music, so from previous historical periods, I will explain, let's say we're doing motets such as Sicut Cervus by Palestrina. I might say to the audience, okay, so in the beginning, you're going to hear the tenors are going to open with this melody that each section of the choir is going to sing. And for every new line of text that you hear, you're going to hear a new melody. This is what the first melody is you're going to hear. Then the tenors sing the melody. And then even if there's some, I think I'm quite funny, so I use humor quite a lot. And so I might even just say to the audience, there's going to be a test at the end. How many times do you hear that melody? And so at least now they're sort of engaged beyond just watching Billy, their Billy sing on stage. And to give them the historical context of what was going on at the time. Now, with both of those approaches, that all takes time, right? So if you're going to delve into the context of the music, you probably have to rehearse less music. Particularly in the choral sphere, it seems as though we usually perform sort of 5 or 6 pieces in a semester concert. And I don't think that's written in stone anywhere that has to be the case. So I wonder, what would it be like if we only programmed 3 pieces? So now in the choral context, now you've lost effectively 9 minutes of music, because most choral pieces are 3 minutes long, give or take. But you could use that time that you've taken away to really connect with the audience, to help them understand what it is they're hearing. One concert I remember doing a Q&A with the audience. We did 2 settings of Short on This Shining Night by Lawrence and Barber. And I said to them beforehand, okay, we're going to sing these back to back, and then we're going to have a discussion. We're going to take a vote, see which setting you preferred. And then, again, the critical thing was asking them the follow-up questions as to why. And it was really wonderful, the answers that the audience came up with. And I wonder, too, with this advocacy thing, where too often we do become sort of the entertainment wing of the school, if you like, and this university too. And we probably don't do a good enough job of realizing that there are concrete things we learn in music. Music is an academic subject. And so by showing that more, particularly in the concerts, I think in some previous correspondence, Doug, you had said, well, how might advocacy differ between the students, parents, administrators? But I think at the end of the day, the notion is the same across all of those interested parties, which is just simply revealing the in, inverted commas, the mystery of music.
That's certainly a lot, and I really like how you began your discussion there with even talking about trying to get students to articulate even a specific response that could have a wide array of interpretations. Even in a previous interview I did with the great wind band conductor Frank Battisti, one quote I remember from that interview was he says, even with music, unlike other areas, two and two does not always have to equal 4. We can also have 3 plus 1 equaling 4, and kind of dealing into that array too. With working in an educational context, I really like how you talked about as far as educating the audience as well, and even now talk like in a something a little more specific, even ever so much more, especially as a lot of our advocacy is through what people see in the performance of, or in the context of a performance. Because a lot of times whenever we bring up this topic of advocacy, a lot of people will sometimes just revert to a handout giving statistics on how it makes you better in other academic areas, less likely for harmful activities or the like. But especially on dealing with just the sake of music for music itself. If you were to give one performance right now, and you were to even do tactics like that to educate your audience, and if you had to give some kind of what we call in American school lessons, kind of like an exit ticket, even if you had everyone in your audience write just a 2-sentence response to a question of why is music important, what kind of things would you want your audience members to say in those exit tickets?
It's funny, isn't it, all the jargon that we have? I haven't heard that one, exit tickets. But to just before I answer the question, interestingly, if you go to the NAFME website, I looked up advocacy there, and when you click on a link, what comes up is 20 important benefits of music in our schools, and all of them talk about the secondary benefits of music. So, for example, developing language and reasoning, mastery of memorization, sense of achievement. Well, when you think about it, all of those things are doable in every other subject. So if we use those as a justification, then that's not really helping us. And I fully understand, again, in this day and age, that particularly administrators tend to need sort of solid objective criteria, so whether that's superior ratings, trophies, tours, all that kind of stuff. But I think if I was to try and come up with a brief statement that I believe to be true, but an administrator might think is just sort of airy-fairy, is that music is just an essential part of the human condition. In an age when we are very much into testing and science, technology, mathematics, music allows us not only to exercise the creative part of our brains, but it allows us to understand our own emotions better as individuals. If you have that profound musical experience where the hairs go up on the back of your neck, time seems to be suspended, that's very hard to achieve without the aid of substances, right? And so if music has the power to do that purely through vibration moving through air, there has to be something about that it impacts all humans, and so therefore we should study that. Yes, you have all of those secondary benefits, but there's nothing else in the curriculum that has that effect on the individual.
I certainly agree. And with a lot of that then too, with the aesthetic experience that music gives us, obviously that has a lot to come from what we study in class, or we could say in educational context, the curriculum, which ultimately delves down into the repertoire that we program or even expose to our students, even through the act of listening. So with that said then, could you talk a little bit about, whenever you think about repertoire, whether it's something you program for your top choir at Penn State, or even just something if you were to look up on Spotify to listen to for fulfillment. What exactly constitutes quality musical repertoire?
The $64,000 question. So there are some of our colleagues who would say, well, you can't really define quality, that repertoire selection is very much subjective. I'd recommend a wonderful book by Aaron Copland, What to Listen For in Music. It's a fantastic book. It was written in the 1940s, and it's the kind of book that we could read as professionals, but also, my mum and dad, non-musicians, would be able to read it and get a lot out of it. And he talks about how we receive music. We listen to music in three ways. The first level is at the sensuous level, and so that's where you hear a piece of music and it either excites you, or you think, oh, that's beautiful, or you think, yuck. And then you listen to it at the expressive level, and the idea is you are trying to work out what story is the music telling, even if there's no story, even if it's just absolute music. And then the third level is the musical level, where you're trying to think, well, what is it in the music? What are the musical components that make me have this response? And his point is hopefully listening to all three at the same time. I think particularly today, and particularly in choral music, we sit in that sensuous level very much. So there's a whole lot of nice music being written. There's a whole lot of homophonic music with beautiful suspensions and this kind of thing. You think of composers, maybe Eric Whitacre, Randall Stroop, and the likes. And that's all well and good, but of course, there are far more human emotions that we could and should react to. And so what I try to do is to find music that seems compelling, that seems to be well crafted. So there's a wonderful doctoral study that some of your band listeners might know. Is by Acton Osterling, and it was a PhD study done at University of Iowa in 1978 called An Evaluation of Compositions for Wind Ensemble According to Specific Criteria of Serious Artistic Merit. And within that, he comes up with 10 really wonderful objective ways to determine whether a piece of music has quality or not. The project has been done a couple of times since then, and also with middle school rep as well. I don't know who wrote that or when it was written. But what I find really helpful and to show students is this list of 10 measurable criteria. So trying to sort of put it in a simple way, I must admit, I tend to try to find music that doesn't sound like every other piece. That I try not to follow the recipe, particularly in choral music. We often will say we need to start with some sort of type of opener. We need to have a multicultural piece. We should finish with an African-American piece. And we quite often do that to elicit a stronger response from the audience. But I'm trying to find music that might have a most compelling melody. Do you have a favorite melody, Doug?
One of my favorite melodies, and this is more speaking to me as as a performer, but I even think of just sometimes of a melody of the one movement from Lincolnshire Posy. I think it's The Lost Lady Found. Dum bum 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 bum.
Yep.
And I just remember with that melody, it's just, it is a folk tune to its roots, but it's just one of those things that kind of really stick with you, that can always just pop up in your head, and that's always one through the years it's always stuck with me.
So that'd be a great conversation for students. What makes that melody stick? What do they call it? Be an earworm. So, for example, one of my favorite melodies is Shenandoah. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you. Away, you rolling river. And so what is it about that melody? So it's the opening perfect fourth, and you have the long note. So pieces about longing, what have you, so have this sort of repeated tonic pitch. Then we move up by step a little bit. We cover the pitches based on the tonic triad. And just the use of the rhythm, it seems to be very closely tied to the natural speech element of those words. And so I really am trying to think, particularly in the choral setting. So again, at the moment, we tend to have more melody in the sopranos, and altos tend to basses just have harmonic filler. And so is there music that enables every part to have, that is well crafted? It's not just sort of filler for another part. Is the piano part, does it stand alone in itself as a well-crafted independent musical line, or is it just doubling the choir, or just providing a harmonic crutch, so to speak? And so we haven't got time to go through all of the list of the criteria, but I do tend to try and look for composers who might be off the beaten track a little bit. And if you look at it, I don't know if it's the same in the band realm, but if you look at the marketing materials that come from major publishers, there was one quote where it really, I won't mention the composer or the piece, but it said, the composer has come up with notes and rhythms that you never knew you wanted. What does that mean? Well, it just makes no sense. And then this piece would be a great contest piece. What is that? And did the composer sit down and go, I'm going to write a contest piece? I'm going to write a closer? And I mean, hopefully not. In my opinion, hopefully the composer is so moved to write, whatever it is that they have to express. And then it's up to us as the conductors to determine how does that fit whatever our needs are. But I think too, if you think to yourself, back to your earliest musical experiences, because we can forget those. What was the piece? What was the moment where you thought, boy, I have to do this music thing for a career? Not that you were in a beautiful venue, not that you were first chair, but what about the music? And then taking that to another degree, my feeling as an educator is if I am only going to get to conduct 28 pieces with these students over 3 years, what music are they missing if I choose to do the music I'm doing?
Yeah, and to speak on that a little bit more in detail, I especially know earlier you had mentioned really trying to have a comprehensive approach in your programming. And I know, especially being a band guy, I could program everything in a band, whether it be Western art music or classical music, as you could say, to something of jazz style, to even some medley from a recent movie that came out, or even something like an orchestral transcription from one of the great composers. But as far as that, a lot of what we see in performance-based music education is a high prevalence, of course, of what we could call classical music. So with that said, what do you feel is the role of Western art music in a comprehensive musical curriculum when compared to other styles of music?
It's an interesting question in terms of what do we mean by classical music? So, to my mind, I'm thinking of probably composers from previous historical periods. If you look, and I have fairly hard numbers on quite these next few facts, but usually at professional choral conferences, around about 80% of the music performed comes from 1950, so post-Second World War through to today. And the vast, vast majority of that is from probably the last 10, 15 years. So I think then if you look at, again, a lot of the choral music being composed today, and this is a generalization, and I'm certainly not meaning to be demeaning, but it's almost ballady and so I don't know if you would call it classical music as such. So we're not even really teaching much in terms of the Western classical canon. There's a journalist who you might be familiar with, Stephen Budiansky. It's Stephen with a PH, Budiansky, Budiansky. And he wrote a fascinating opinion piece probably 10, 15 years ago. I think it was in the Washington Post, and it might have been titled "The Kids Play Great, but What About That Music?" And there's a speech he gave to the College Band Directors National Association Eastern Division in Westchester in 2010. And he quotes a teacher who came up to him after one of these presentations and said that he didn't know about Percy Grainger and the whole suites, this is a band director, until he went to grad school, and he was 39. And so again, it's that idea of we talk a lot about we only advocate for classical music, but I don't think that's true. Now, to go back to the question of how important is the Western canon, I think the best answer is that we should, all of us, perform an array of music from historical periods and genres and styles. But we do tend to gravitate to the music that we know and the music that we like. So if you go back to teacher training in universities and schools, if we've only sung certain types of music in school and in college, unless we were curious enough to go and look for it ourselves, we're not likely to know about it or perform it. I look at some of the older great choral music, and really it is written by some of the greatest human minds we've had, and it's up there with remarkable architecture. It's up there with remarkable painting, remarkable poetry. And so it seems as though sometimes I think that it's maybe seems being a bit elitist or not necessarily cool to acknowledge and appreciate the music that's gone before. But again, just being very aware that we do need to be doing music of other cultures and as many styles and genres as we can.
Certainly. So now to move on to another topic, this is an area where, especially over the last maybe 10 years, it has become a lot more of a bigger discussion, even not just in music education, but even as society, is in the importance of the role of gender. So if I can ask you maybe to answer this in two parts, is how does gender play a role in music education as a whole, and then specifically even to running a choral program? What role does gender play in a choral department?
Well, that's a terrific question, and I really can only speak to this with fairly recent sort of experience and research, and really just probably more to the choral realm than elsewhere. But it is now there's quite a bit of scholarship being done in the choral area, particularly as to how for transgender singers and those who undergo hormone therapy, what does this mean for vocal development? And then how do we treat that within a choral setting? There's a professor at Cal State Long Beach, Joshua Palki, I should say, Paalki, who's doing quite a bit of writing. There's a really terrific book published by Hal Leonard called Teaching with Respect, Inclusive Pedagogy for Choral Directors by Stephen Sieck, S-I-E-C-K, who's in Wisconsin. And so one of the things that has really struck me at Penn State, only 3 years ago, we had our first transgender singers audition to be in the choral program. And I was really proud of how quickly we were able to make necessary changes. So, for example, we no longer have the sort of obvious binary choral outfits. So everyone now wears black pants and a black top and black blazer or a jacket. In rehearsals, we've done away with all references to ladies and gentlemen. Women, you sing from here, men, you sing from there. And that's taken a lot of work, after 20 or 30 years of using those terms. Even I think in the choral realm, one of the sort of more sort of hot topics is, so if you have, for example, a student who is transgender, identifies male, but is biologically female, what do you do with that? So a case in point, we have a singer who in the Penn State Glee Club, which is a tenor-based lower voice choir, and he really can only sing down to about an E below middle C, and he's probably about a major third, or there's a major third's worth of notes he can't sing. And we've dealt with this over a number of months, and I listen to him sing fairly frequently on his own. But what occurred to me is that for this student, he feels more himself in the 2 hours, 40 minutes a week when he's in the Glee Club with the tenors and basses than anything else. So then my opinion is that for his mental health, this is the best thing I can do for him. Some folks would argue, well, but if this is for all intents and purposes, a female voice that's singing in the low part of the register all the time, that could cause vocal damage. Now, we've spoken about that and we meet fairly frequently, but to my mind, the health and well-being of the student trumps everything. And so even particularly in choirs, what we call a choir, you have to think with these names, who are you appealing to with your name, and then also who are you putting off? So, for example, if you have a tenor bass ensemble that might be called Only Men Aloud, ALOUD, that's clever, but that does send a signal to some folks that they really are not going to fit in that choir. Thinking about those, there was an upper voice group I came across. They were called the Beauty Parlor, and it's fascinating now that I'm more aware of, particularly the use of language when going out into schools and festivals. The number of times that I hear teachers just use, ladies and gentlemen, men, women, all of this kind of terminology, but we don't know by looking at someone how they identify with regard to gender.
Yeah, those are some great points. And to even touch on that a little bit more, I know, especially in a previous episode, I had a guest who had talked about in their approach to programming, especially a lot of the music that we study, it also reflecting real events. An example would be Derek Fox, who was on a previous episode, programming a piece for his choirs. It's a relatively new piece, but it's called Seven Voices of the Unarmed, I believe, and it talks about some stages of or events of police brutality, especially over the last 15 years in America, and just reflecting, real events, but even just opening up that big discussion, to really, just open that discussion on such what sometimes people can make a very subtle topic, and as far as like with music education and with these issues, not issues, but with these subjects and topics of gender, especially over the past 10 years, a lot of what I've observed at music education conferences or even seminars is, people don't even elaborate as much on it as you have, but the topic is either, just been what bathrooms, what hotel rooms do we assign? And, whenever we talk about programming music to reflect real things going on, to bring those discussions even to life even more, is there any approaches you feel that we can do in our music programming or even what we talk about in rehearsal to just open up the discussion of this topic for all of our students to appreciate it more?
I would be curious to see how that would work in an instrumental setting. It might be interesting to dig into the maybe some biographical information about the composer or some contextual information about the piece that you're performing, who it might have been commissioned for. But of course, in choral music, we deal so much with words that it stares us in the face every day. So even if we're singing a text on love, chances are it is a piece that is looking at love from the male perspective, written by a male. There are pieces that are written from the woman's perspective, but again, written by a male. And so this occurred to me. We were doing the Brahms Liebeslieder waltzes several years ago now, and it occurred to me that here I was giving them imagery of, again, the traditional boy meets girl. And then it occurred to me I have several gay students in the choir. And so here I am waxing lyrical with all these beautiful images and things, but to those students, that doesn't speak to them as much. So one interesting idea is to just simply change the references, the pronouns in the piece. So whether if it makes some sort of poetic sense, maybe you change half of them. Maybe instead of he all the time, you could be she. I think we have to be careful with avoiding stereotypes in texts that we sing. For example, there's a piece, "Manly Men," by Kurt Connect, and it's a clever piece, but it's we are men and we like to sing in big block chords and close harmony, and then it goes through sort of stereotypes of each of the voice parts, and it's fun, it's funny, and that's okay, but it is stereotypical. Aaron Copland from the Stomp Your Foot from the Promised Land, a fantastic opera, a terrific piece of music, but the women sing a line or two in there where it's something like, we like to, oh yes, men must labor to be happy, plowing fields and planting rows, but ladies love a life that's easy, churning butter, milking cows. And it's a great piece of music, but every time I sort of think about programming, I just thought, I just can't bring myself to perpetuate that stereotype. Maybe in terms of what can we do to think about this more broadly is a few weeks ago, some of the singers from one of the choirs here sang at a memorial service for transgender people. Maybe, there might be a gay and lesbian chorus in town that, that people could connect with. And it's a difficult topic, isn't it? Because it depends on, what the school board's feelings are. It depends on what the local community is. And so I'm not sure that there's a solution for everyone.
Yeah, and there's some interesting points there, and especially as you had mentioned, how would that be brought up in the instrumental realm? Because I even know just recently there are compositions dealing with specific instances, like even Randall Standridge, wind band composer, just came out with a piece I believe he commissioned within the last year. The subject was Stonewall in 1959, and even as you said, I liked how with aligning this. I don't know if the right word is values or something of that of somebody like a school board or local community, but even if to embrace in our programming and teaching just the subject of diversity, just even to bring a larger awareness of the large world around us, not just with music, to our students. Like let's even say if because obviously in your setting right now at a major university, the local community is what you could maybe call a little bit more progressive than maybe somewhere in a little of sometimes maybe of not the stereotype, but maybe of a rural setting, just as far as even what we're exposed to of within our population. So to maybe take this in a specific context, even if you and I were to go and start a music program at some high school where the mindset might be as progressive, and not in that we're exactly preaching personal values, but even just if we were to if you and I were to co-teach a choir and we were to bring up a piece about maybe a gay or lesbian composer, and maybe even if the piece wasn't specifically on that topic, just to help the students maybe understand a little bit more about the composer as a person, or how maybe that part of their life had a significant impact on the composition. How would you talk to students about that in a way that would even just kind of help build a level of appreciation or understanding within your students?
Sure. And that kind of comes back to how we started with the idea of advocacy and context for the piece of music. And, that could be a Wikipedia 5-minute homework for everybody. Go and look at the Wikipedia page for Benjamin Britten and come back with 10 facts, or all of you must find one fact from that page. Someone's bound to come back with the idea that, oh, Benjamin Britten was gay and lived with Peter Pears and all this kind of thing. One of the interesting things with this is some people might argue, do you need to mention that the composer was gay? In as much as a gay composer's music sounds exactly the same as a straight composer's music, as the same as a man's piece of music, as the same as a woman composer's piece of music. I think perhaps another way to do this is not to perpetuate stereotypes. So, for example, particularly in the choral setting, if you're singing very, male pieces, pirate songs, drinking songs that perpetuate one or two, just one or two aspects of what it is to be male, and maybe try to think back to the idea of the context. So a lot of these, for example, let's go back to the Brahms Liebeslieder. These are love songs that we know to have been written between male and female. Maybe you come up with an open-ended question, how might that change today? What might be different? What language might we use today? How would you paraphrase this today in modern language? If you had to do a 150-character tweet or whatever, something like that. You obviously have to be incredibly sensitive because, in some of those situations, you probably have students who don't identify as the usual binary gender. You might have students who have different sexual preferences but are not going to admit to that. So maybe it's even, again, through listening assignments, through a little bit of homework, where even if it's music by, maybe play something from a gala chorus, a gay and lesbian chorus. So you're just at least sending a message that this is a thing, and that hopefully by raising it, you're empathetic to those particular students.
Yeah, lots of good points there, and I even like your idea of kind of spinning it in an even way. If, as you put with sending out a tweet there or something like that, that's pretty unique. So now to go into some questions that we ask all of our guests, and this can be specific now to if I were to go and observe you tomorrow with one of your choirs at Penn State, could you talk about one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
Sure. Really, the two things I try to do more than anything is questioning. Again, like we said at the beginning, it might even be a question to help sensitize them to the score. So who's got the melody at this point? Again, which was your favorite bit? Why is it your favorite bit? That kind of thing. But also the other thing I use a heck of a lot is physical movement. Because when you think, particularly for singing, it's this kind of abstract thing. You can't see the instrument. And also it's a very psychological discipline. So anything you can do, physical movement can really help solve a lot of issues very, very quickly. But I think even in instrumental ensembles, one thing I joke that I have this patent on something called the thiolator. And so the idea is you sit on the front of your seat, one foot in front of the other. And as you feel that there might be some tension increasing in your part, then you come out of your seat, and you might have to hold your position for a while if the tension just sort of stays at that point, or you might come down, or then you might sort of stand up fully. And so that gives them a sense of that music does have tension release. it could be even in your low brass, point to who's got the melody as they're playing, so physical movement and questioning are my go-to activities, because I want the singers, the students, to almost come up with the answers themselves.
Yeah, certainly, and I know with questioning, especially within choral conductors, when you deal with a lot of text, that is a great response that we hear a lot of. I even know Ryan Beacon once, when he was on the show, talked a lot about even when he asked questions, just kind of even going after what might this sound like if we tried to make this sound this way, or even saying, okay, let's go back, but now what if we tried to make this music now sound with a totally different expressive intent, and it can really guide some unique thoughts and opinions. So now, with that said, to move on to the next question, if I were to ask you, just as a blanket statement, why do we teach music in schools, and what is its importance to society?
I think I might have already referred to that earlier on, that music is an essential part of the human condition. There's a quote that I often use from an American choral conductor, Howard Swan. And the quote goes like this: "The very essence of our art, what we are about, why music and people are so important, is namely for the creation and recreation of that which is beautiful, beauty in form, beauty in sound, and hopefully beauty in the wonderful transformation of the human spirit." There's not another class in the curriculum that I think does a significant job of transforming the human spirit.
So now to talk about even a little bit back how you talked about some of your life story and all the different things you've done in your career. Obviously, you have had some instances with some really remarkable people, whether it be your personal or professional life. So if you could talk just about a few of them, what leaders have inspired you in your career, and what lessons have you taken from them?
Well, Rodney Eichenberger was really opened my eyes to the importance of gesture and its impact on sound. So if you hold your hands at shoulder level, you're going to get a different sound from if you hold your hands, closer to your belly button. Also from Rod, he didn't take himself too seriously, and had a very, very positive outlook on life and in his teaching. You never knew when Rod was having a bad day. From Jerry Blackstone, he taught me the importance of realizing the composer's intentions. How do you relate the things that are on the page to the musician? So I remember one time, this might be not quite the exact story, but he said, well, how are you going to show the staccato in the second oboe part? Well, first of all, I hadn't even realized there was a staccato in the second oboe part. But then also my thinking before that was probably, well, why would I show the staccato to the oboe player, and exacting detail with Jerry, high expectations. And again, I've never heard or met anybody as eloquent as Jerry in rehearsals. His language matches the music he's rehearsing, whether it's beautiful language or whether it's highly descriptive. And again, I didn't take himself too seriously. A laugh with both of those professors is always very close to hand. And then I would say also my colleague, Dennis Glocke, who's the director of concert bands at Penn State, in terms of the depth to which he thinks about music, and also how he will stick to his beliefs and will not be swayed by what the popular sort of cool things are at the time. And again, very creative in his teaching and in his work. And in fact, I think all three of those people, music is at the center of everything they do.
Yeah, and that's certainly a lot of great lists there, and I really enjoyed listening, guys. As a lot of listeners know, I did get my undergrad in Penn State, and we did have some academic time together, but me being a more instrumental guy, a lot of my time in rehearsal was with Dennis. But it's really unique to hear you, even in a different, as a different director of a different medium, I guess, so to say, having those same qualities and looking together to really admire. So even to speak on now Penn State a little bit, going back in my time, whenever I was getting my degree in music education, as part of the music ed faculty, a very influential person in my upbringing was Mrs. Noreen Ferris. She's been retired now for some time, and if she's listening, I wish her well, and please ask her to drop me a line. But anyway,
sure.
For anyone who is not familiar with Mrs. Noreen Ferris, her job as part of the undergrad music curriculum was to, especially her important role was preparing you maybe that semester or two before you go out in the field and are actively student teaching. So, and then what she would do a lot of was what we called, at least at Penn State and undergrad, was seminars prior to student teaching and during student teaching. So, and they would cover everything of just reviewing, lesson planning, talking about some topics, whether it be classroom management or the like, that you really don't get in a comprehensive curriculum sometimes, because we spend a lot of time in teacher preparation of just going over conducting, basic musicianship through ensembles and lessons and the like, and just even to more some specific teaching things. But getting it now into this context, let's say if you were to step out of your role as a director of a choral program and go into that type of position where you are overseeing a course of undergraduate music education majors. It's the last week of the fall semester, and a little bit after the winter break, sometime in January, they're going to go out and start their teaching career as student teachers. If you had one more seminar with that group of maybe 15 to 20 students, what advice would you give those people to help them best thrive with their students?
I think as educators, we are either the most limiting or the most empowering thing for our students. And I think our charge is to not only help the students to learn about music, but to learn to love music. There's a T.S. Eliot quote that says, "We had the experience, but we missed the meaning." And so I firmly believe that you have to be passionate about it, about music. You have to be curious about music, all kinds of music. And you have to be able to sell sawdust to lumber yards. And I think that the idea of passion being contagious is really a thing. And because if you're passionate about it, you're probably going to pique the interest of the students, and they're going to wonder, well, why is Mr. Conrad sort of so hot on this Holst suite or whatever? And I think to hold true to your core values, to know that there are going to be rough seas on some days, but to always go back to, why did you get into music? What made you passionate about this career? And what of those experiences do you want to replicate for your students?
Those are a lot of great points. So with all that said, then, that wraps up our interview here. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Kiver, again, for taking the time to speak with me. This has been a great discussion. I know for myself, I've definitely learned a lot here, and it's been great catching up with you. And as you're gearing up here now for your winter break, all the best to you and your students.
Thank you, Doug. Enjoyed it very much.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Christopher Kiver for sharing his wisdom and insight on what it takes to promote quality and excellence in a comprehensive music program. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to stay up to date on all future episodes by subscribing to us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Music, and iHeartRadio, and also following us on social media on Facebook under Director Circle to stay updated on all news and future episodes. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.